Hey guys, welcome to One Church Online. So good to be here with you guys. My name is John. I'm the lead pastor at One Church, and I am so glad that you're here with us today as we continue to celebrate adoption and adoption ministry. Last week we kicked off this 2-week series with a great celebration of Orphan and Stand Sundays, these two global movements that celebrate adoption ministries as well as foster care. And it was so good to just kind of share the heart of God for adoption, because God's heart is for adoption. God's heart breaks, it moves for the widows and for the orphans, for the oppressed and marginalized in our society. And when we adopt children, and even when we support adoption ministries or organizations, guys, we reveal the very heart of God to those around us, to our neighbors, and to our community. And we saw last week in Ephesians this reality that each and every one of us, when we know Jesus as our Lord and Savior, when we meet Him and accept Him, when we receive Him into our lives, we get to claim that God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, the creator of the universe, that God is our Father, that God has adopted us into His family. And so no matter where you come from, no matter what your background is, no matter what your earthly father was like, God Almighty is your perfect heavenly Father. And here's the coolest part for me. We looked at Ephesians chapter 1 last week, and in verse 4, let's read this together here. It says, "Even before He made the world, God loved us and chose us in Christ to be holy." And here's the best part. Here's the cool part. It says that we are without fault in His eyes. How cool is that? Like, do you understand that? Do you understand that for yourself? That no matter what you've done, no matter where you've been, God the Father sees you without fault in His eyes. And that's what adoption does. You see, just as God came to us and accepted us, no matter what we've done, where we've been, where we come from, just as God accepted us like that, we get to pass that on. We get to show that love to others and do exactly that same thing for someone else. You see, we get to step into the messiness, the brokenness of life, and reveal the very heart of God to others. That's what Christianity is all about. That's what Christianity should be all about, right? Like stepping into the gaps for what Jesus calls the least of these, supporting and loving the widows, the orphans, the oppressed and marginalized. But the reality is, we don't always get it right. As a church, as a global church, we don't always get it right. There's this great prophet named Bono. All right, maybe he's not a prophet, but he does have a really good quote. Let me read this to you. He says, "Religion can be the enemy of God. It's often what happens when God, like Elvis, has left the building. A list of instructions where there was once conviction, dogma where once people just did it, a congregation led by a man where once they were led by the Holy Spirit, discipline replacing discipleship." And you know what? When I read that quote, I think he might just be right. Because when we are religious, when we value our religion, our rules and our traditions above and beyond our simple commandment to love one another, maybe that's when, as Bono says, God has left the building, or maybe it just feels like He's left the building. You know what I mean by that? Like, it's super easy to prioritize religion, all the rules and regulations, the do thises and don't do that's, above and beyond what God has called us to do, which is to love one another. It's super easy to make our faith more about those rules and regulations than about relationship. So what does God have to say about religion? Well, let's take a look. James 1:27, as we saw last week, it says, "Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world." Done and done. Checkmate. Right? So we as a Christian church, we need to take our commitment to adoption seriously because God takes it very, very seriously. We need to take it as serious as we do our outreaches, gathering coats and presents for those who are in need, for those who can't afford. As serious as we take those things, guys, we've got to take adoption that seriously because it is really and truly at the very heart of God. Notice in James 1:27, I'll put it back up here. It says, religion, again, that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. But notice, it says nothing about obeying the laws there. It says nothing about commands or traditions. In fact, Jesus did give us a new command. He says to love one another. As he has loved us, so we are to love one another. And that's when people will know that we are his disciples. And we talked about this last week where some of you who are watching right now, some of you have been feeling that tug, that pull towards adoption. And I encouraged you last week to pray over it, right? To pray on that. Ask God for wisdom and direction. Ask him for conviction to make it so crystal clear as to what he's wanting you to do. But here's the thing. If you choose to say yes to that calling, I want you to know that your church, One Church, we are here to support you. We want to walk with you each and every step of the way. Okay? So you will never be alone in this process. But many of you are not called to adoption, or at least you haven't been feeling that calling yet. Right? So if you have not been called to adopt, I'm here to tell us that each and every one of us who is part of the church is called to support adoption and adoption ministries. And there's lots of ways that we can do that. We're going to hear about it in just a moment. But some of the easy ways are just to give to One Church. If you are generous with One Church, that allows us and frees us up to be generous with those outside of our church. And one of our callings is to support adoption ministries. You can support some of our local ministry partners like Miriam's Heart. You can also offer respite care to adoptive and foster families to give them a break when they need it. There's so many other ways to do it, but I'm excited, guys, that in just a moment I'm going to flip over and I'm going to show you an interview that I did with Elizabeth Acapinti from Miriam's Heart. We did this live on Sunday. We recorded it, so I want to show that interview for you now. God bless, guys. Have a great, great week, and we'll see you next week.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for welcoming me. And thank you. I think we were talking before service about how we met.
Yes.
And I think that's actually how we should start.
I think so too. We were trying to figure out how we met, and then we're pretty sure. I think where we landed was that my wife Carrie, as well as our camera technician. Oh yeah, you got to get some tape there. Yeah. We're high class here, guys. Okay. But what we were talking about was how we're pretty sure that Carrie was stalking Elizabeth. Yeah. Right. So many of you know that my family we fostered and then we adopted 3 amazing kids. 2 of them are up there running graphics for us today. That's right. And Malachi back there. But here's the thing: when the kids came to us, we were like, well, "What are we doing? How do you do this? Like, what's going on here?" So Carrie, I think she did a Google search on like adoption services support in our area, and Miriam's Heart came up.
She showed up at my house, which I have said to her before. It's not the only time that happened. And like my husband Jim and I, we too are an adoptive family. We adopted 2 of our kiddos. We like to mess with people a little bit because my husband actually adopted 3 kids and I only adopted 2. And that really messes with people. And that's because when I met and married my husband, I was a single parent. And I think that sort of pours into sort of the holistic nature of Miriam's and why, we like to sort of sit in the messy and in the brokenness of our own lives. We're not, as you were talking about the gospel of adoption, I felt like I needed to say, as an adoptive mom, it's always this parallel that we draw, which is appropriate, but we have to be super careful because the hero in the gospel story is Jesus Christ. And the hero in the adoption story is by no means me and my husband or you and your wife. And if anything, it's our kids who've endured loss and trauma to come into our families. And the hero is also the Lord, who gave us sort of maybe a little tiny piece of who he is, to be able to just connect and be in relationship with someone, that maybe otherwise we wouldn't have been blessed to know or to parent. But we always like to say that we're the lucky ones. We're the ones that won the lottery by being adoptive parents and by fostering kids who needed us to stand in the gap. That we won the lottery when we got to do that.
Yeah. There's something about that season, that situation when you're going through an adoption. And listen, I'm not going to mince words here. It's hard. When you adopt, when you foster, it is hard. There's so many different things that are kind of pulling at you and pushing you and pulling you in different directions. So it's hard. But man, as you're going through it, you are watching the gospel happen right before your eyes, in and through you, as well as the kids that you have welcomed into your home. It is so messy, yes. And that's one thing I love about Elizabeth, is that she's never afraid of the mess.
No.
Right? Like one of our core values is authenticity. And I don't know that you get more authentic than Elizabeth.
I was thinking, I saw Janu, I saw you this morning, and I wanted to say to you how grateful I am for Collide Summit and just some of the work you've been doing. And something that from the very beginning of Miriam's, I felt compelled to say here. One of the first conversations I had with someone was after Collide Summit, and she came up to me and she was like, my husband says adoption's just not natural. And I said, he's right. It's not natural. It's divine. And I'm telling you, that was from God himself, because I probably could have been offended by that, but I wasn't. I just was like, I understand why you would feel like that's weird. We are the weird adoption people. I think we know that, but it is weird. It is weird to welcome a stranger into your home. It is weird. That's not a normal thing to do. But there are a lot, I would say the best things in my life have been the God-shaped weird things that I've chosen to do, like starting Miriam's Heart, and like being blessed to be an adoptive mom. And there's other things. I'm sure you guys have stepped into this uncertainty where God was definitely directing you to do something, but it felt at the time weird. I find that that's where God generally hangs out. And when it feels perfect, I'm not talking, you should have peace, don't get me wrong. But when it feels perfect and it's not uncomfortable and it's not messy, you're probably not doing something that God has called you to do. I just hate to say it. We aren't promised easy things. We're promised that we will have many troubles in this world. Many troubles. But God says, take heart. I've overcome the world. So that, just having the glimpse of God's goodness and his patience and all of those things through the stories that we get to see, the vantage point, which I use that phrase a lot. I love my vantage point. I like to be able to look in and see what God is restoring and redeeming and fixing and refining. And it's a beautiful thing. So thank you guys for participating in Orphan and Stand Sunday. You may not know, you may have said this last week, but this is the 20th anniversary of that initiative. And interestingly, it started in the same year, both here in the United States and in Zambia. And it started by a woman, a widow, in both of those scenarios. And this was not coordinated. We just learned this as a team this past year, that God moved on the heart of a widow who had almost nothing to give. But when the pastor made a call, like, who will stand for these kids who need us? It was a widow who stood up. And I was like, how beautiful is that? Like, he just does these beautiful, this knitting together of his purpose. And so thank you for being a church that participates in that annual time of remembrance. In a way, it's not really a celebration, although we're celebrating what God has done. It's sort of a time as a church, it's more of a Good Friday vibe to me. It's more of a, man, we've got a lot of work to do. And man, there's a lot of kids out there. And man, we have all these resources, and we have this hope and this redemption story. Like, we've got the tools. He gave us these things. So thank you guys for being a part of that. As a local leader here in New Jersey with Miriam's and that, I also sit sit in this national team where I'm able to see what God is doing, not just, in the far-flung place, but right here in dirty Jersey. So I'm just really excited to see God moving here, and I know He's doing incredible things here in New Jersey, so I just want to encourage you.
Awesome. I could just listen to you talk all day long, honestly. Oh, man. All right, so what is, so just kind of level set, what is Miriam's Heart? Like, how did it start? What is this organization all about? And, what did it make Miriam's Heart?
Number one question I get asked, also the number one name I get called, aside from my sister's name, Jen. I get called Miriam all the time. And it's hilarious because I'm like, okay, so who would name a ministry after themselves? I think that's a little weird. But all of that to say, I think that, I know the name Miriam's Heart, where it came from, and that it came from a discussion with my dad, where he was challenging me because I was all fired up and probably just full of passion without direction. And I think it was God sort of beginning to just rev on my heart around this. But he said, I don't see adoption in the Bible. And I was like, what? And I was really ticked. And if I get ticked, it's probably good. I either write or I pray or I yell. So I was doing all of those things, and God brought me, I asked God to show me so I could win this debate with my dad. Show me in the Bible where is adoption. It's not an innuendo. I wanted to really go back to him with facts. And he brought me to the Moses story.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that it's called Miriam's Heart is, as you guys heard this morning, you see this we really romanticize this story, but I like to look at it through the lens of today, and what we might think about a mom who put her kid in a basket and floated it down a river. And what that neglect and desperation might look like. That would definitely lead a child to enter the foster care system. We really romanticize it, but it truly is. People I'm not justifying bad choices in the direction of children, I'm just trying to broaden a perspective. People make desperate choices sometimes that result in harm to children. And so this is what you're seeing. You're seeing a woman who knows that her child will definitely face certain death. And so she makes a desperate choice to make sure that she can try to keep her child alive, which you might see in the behavior of a mom today, going to work and leaving her baby alone. There's things that people do when they're desperate, not justifying it, just trying to maybe look at that story a different way. And so you see this girl, and I don't think that she was a woman, Miriam. I have to guess that she was about within a decade of her baby brother, right? Let's assume we've got a 10-year-old who knows that babies are being put to death. And she goes and she watches over this child floating in the river in a basket. And then you see Pharaoh's daughter, and you see her drawing him out, instructing her people to draw this child out. And Scripture says that Miriam stood at a distance to see what would happen. And so when you interface with Miriam's Heart, we take all of those elements. We really prioritize a biological family's right in their child's life. We also prioritize a child's right to be safe and in a stable environment. So we want to make sure that when a child is going into the hands of its adoptive or foster parent, that person also has what they need. And you see that in the actions and in the life of Miriam, because she makes sure that the child has a safe connection to its biological family, and she makes sure that this child's needs are getting met. And maybe she makes sure that the child isn't immediately put to death by just jumping in there and being willing to say, hey, I can help. And so for us, that's kind of how we operate. We fill a gap. There's a gap between the state and what they do, and adoption agencies and what they do, and the needs of kids who have gone through trauma and loss. I feel like in some ways it's been my job and my role to articulate things and be kind of a translator between the adopted or former foster youth and the survivor of child abuse and the people who want to help and say the hard things, like, I'm not the hero, and say those difficult things that articulate their heart's cry and maybe the things that they're trying to say. And so, in that gospel story, for instance, these kids are coming into families because of, needing to be adopted or being in foster care through no fault of their own. They're not like some sinful thing that, and so we have to be careful as the church to know what those pain points are and how we speak about the adopted person and how, and I make mistakes all the time. We just try to have like an openness in our family to talk about how did this make you feel? And what's really cool with Miriam's at this point is now I'm seeing a second generation of young people. So that first generation, they're starting to get married. It's weird. I know we're still the same age as when we met, but like those kids are now like, they're getting married and they're having kids of their own, and it's been a really cool thing to be able to watch that fruit of the healing that really I believe only God can bring, and the hope that God can bring into the dark places of all of our lives.
Yeah. I remember when Lane is 18 now. This was a few years back, and we would ask her, as an early teenager, hey, what do you want to do? Like, when you grow up, what do you want to do? She's like, oh, I want to have a huge mansion with a ton of bedrooms so that I can adopt as many kids as there are in the world. I'm like, oh man, as a dad?
Yeah.
Man. And then I think about like how I feel when my kids talk about adoption. When I look at Lane and her love of kids and her love to want to adopt and do all that, I'm like, how I feel about her, how much do you think God feels about us? Right? I'm such an imperfect dad. Just ask her.
Yeah.
But like God is perfect, and when we enter into this space, man, He looks at us and He's just like, man, I am so proud of you, and I just love what you are doing for my son and my daughter. You know.
Yeah.
So let's get some of these numbers here.
Yeah, man.
I talked about this a little bit last week, but you were the one that I was talking to the week before, where I kind of got a little bit of insight on this. But right now, or every year, I guess, 30,000 kids are served by a foster care system. That's a lot of kids. 4,000 kids at any given time.
That's just New Jersey.
Yeah, that's New Jersey. It's like 500,000, I think,
it's
nationwide.
It's really numbers staggering.
Yeah. 4,000 kids at any given moment are in out-of-home placements. And right now, there's about 2,000 kids who are currently waiting for permanency. They're waiting to be adopted. They've lived through the system for usually a couple of years, and now they're waiting, and they're waiting, and they're waiting. So, like, how do we make sense of all this? Like, what are your thoughts on it?
So this is hard because, when I was looking over this, I was thinking about, I just finished grad school, so I was sitting in the statistics and the numbers because I was really moved to do something and to understand, because looking at statistics and looking at adverse childhood experiences, which I'm going to refer to as ACEs from here on out, because I don't want to say adverse childhood experiences over and over. But when you look at kids who've come into families who've been placed in foster care or who've been adopted, they all have ACEs. And so the world is now looking at ACEs like, oh my gosh, this is such a key into so many other things, and it's such a predictor of bad outcomes across all domains, from early death to risky behaviors to health problems. Like, it's literally connected. So a trauma is literally connected to bad outcomes. And so I went to grad school because I was like, but wait, I can look at somebody like Aaron Judge or Babe Ruth or Faith Hill, and I can see that these are people who were adopted or placed in foster care or both, and they had incredible outcomes. So why did they rise above, even though they had ACEs, and why were they able to overcome those adverse experiences? And why does the vast majority, like if you're just a statistician and a numbers geek, why would everything predict that you would end up over here? And why do so many adopted people and former foster youth end up over here, like Steve Jobs? And I mean, there's many, and we're talking across gender, we're talking across race. Why? And so numbers became sort of a comfort to me, because I was like, you can look at the numbers locally, you can look at the numbers globally, and you can start to understand. It doesn't make it better, but it's just start to understand. So looking at New Jersey, what I like to say is there's way too many kids with allegations of child abuse. And 2020 was weird for all of us, right? So every predictor of child maltreatment that would elevate those numbers is present. Job insecurity, food insecurity, housing issues, all of those things that would predict, history would predict after a pandemic that you would see more kids entering the system. So everybody is now just waiting for the tsunami of problems. We don't really have a picture because the two main reporters of child abuse are schools and the police. So they haven't had eyes on our kids. So we don't really know. I don't know if you guys watched the 60 Minutes that was talking about the missing kids in Texas. Like there was a literal guidance counselor like trekking through the woods looking for kids because they hadn't shown back up to school. So we've got that sort of hovering over us. So yeah, concerned about numbers, very much so. The state of New Jersey will say, and they're correct in saying, that there have been drastic reductions in the numbers of kids in foster care. And that is statistically correct. But it's problematic for me because you saw the numbers of reports of child abuse increasing and the numbers of kids in care and open cases drastically decreasing. And the people on the ground, people like me who foster and sort of see and engage in that, would say we're closing cases and we're returning and reunifying kids without measures of stability. And so these are sort of I would say my local passions when I have the opportunity to talk to decision makers, and when you have the opportunity to talk to decision makers, or if you are a decision maker, two things. The measure of stability should be universal. The same things that I have to do as a foster parent should be the same things that a biological parent has to do. It should just be universal. And the second would be, my feeling is, we don't have a pathway to open adoption in New Jersey. And so we don't give the dignity to a birth mother to make a plan for adoption that's easy and simple. We say things like, your child will have to be abused first before we can help you. That's not a joke. I've heard that more than twice from people who are calling to say, I can't do this. I love my child, but I don't have what it takes to parent. We like to, and we feel very comfortable with that happening in the Philippines and in China. It feels really okay with us that a birth mom is making an adoption plan. But we have like a weird identity crisis here in the US about it. And we need to grow up a little more. We need to look at how other countries and cultures are doing this well or badly and learn from it and apply that. So having an open adoption, a pathway in New Jersey to open adoption that involves the muscle of the state, and they have the money and they have the muscle, they just don't have the God heart all the time. That's us. That's where we come in. But yeah, I can talk about that for hours. That's something I'm pretty passionate about because I've interfaced with the birth mom who knows she doesn't have what it takes. But we don't give her the dignity of helping her to figure out how to make a plan. Like we at Miriam's do, but there's not a process here. And other states have that. So that's something that we need to get passionate about because kids we all need permanency. It's a big word. It just means you need to know what's happening in your life in 5 minutes or tonight. And if you want to know what it's like to be a foster kid, imagine how you would feel if I said, hey, you're sleeping over at my house tonight, which you might think would be like, hey, cool, but there'd come a point that would feel super awkward and uncomfortable. And you'd be like, I don't even know where the bathroom is, and you know what I'm saying? So there's all these things that, we can kick around after if you want to talk about it.
You had mentioned to me, or we had talked a while ago about, I think you called it Care Portal.
Yes.
Right? And we were kind of talking about how that was one of the next steps forward, and one of the ways that we can kind of move forward and, kind of make the system a little bit better, at least from our vantage point, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what Care Portal is?
I would love to. So we implemented Care Portal in March of this past year. I don't know about you guys. Are you weird with the years? Is it just me? I don't know. I know it's 2021, and I'm kind of just waiting for 2022 because I know my brain will be like, and engage in the gears. I'm turning the page. But so we implemented Care Portal in a weird time to be starting something new and very costly. But we knew. I knew we had that in common. We knew that God was telling us to do it, which I imagine you know too. So when you're starting something new and big, and God's telling you to do it, you just do it.
Just do it.
You the funding will come, whatever. But so we started Care Portal. We pay for, and I hope that one church will be one of these churches. So we pay for 10 churches. I think we have 7 as it stands this morning. So you guys could be the 8th, and I think you'd be like the 2nd in Somerset County. And what Care Portal is a fancy word for software that allows your church to interface with other churches and meet the needs, the tangible needs of families. So Care Portal has allowed us to do things like fund a funeral for an adoptive mom who died suddenly of a cardiac event. Or we had a foster family lose everything in a fire, and we were able to mobilize thousands of dollars around that family. And this church sent mattresses, and that church sent food. And it's cool because it allows churches to just lock arms and have a huge impact without feeling like they're competing with each other. It allows them to work together outside of their denominational lines. It's super cost effective, and it to me, it's just genius. It allows us to impact families better. It allows you to measure your impact, just even statewide, but also just your church. What are we doing? So most recently, it was Afghan refugee kids. So we were able to mobilize stuff around that. And it was, in that scenario, Care Portal only allows us to enter needs up to like 50 kids or something at a time, which makes sense. It's just statistical software that just helps you guys to build a team and communicate with other teams and whatever. But it only allowed me to put that it was 50 kids, but it was actually just under 200 kids that had landed here as refugees from Afghanistan. And so I couldn't put that in, and I couldn't put in all the things that I knew about that scenario. But what I was able to put in is now measurable, and you can sort of see the impact in New Jersey since this past spring, how much the Christian church has risen up in support of I would call the least of these. You know, I love the Matthew 25. Yeah, the Matthew 25 statements. In my life, it's probably applied to me at some points, and I love how that could apply to the people that we're trying to help.
Yeah. Well, the good news is we did sign up. I don't know what to do next. We'll have to talk this week.
Yeah, and you don't have to do anything. That's what's so cool. You basically so if you're here and you belong to one church, or if you're here and you don't yet, but you want to, talk with John and tell him you want to be on the Care Portal team. Because there's roles in that software that allows you to talk inside your church with your team and communicate, so there can be church-entered needs. So say there's a family in your church that has a need, a simple thing. Like the most recent thing I think that came through, it was like, we had an at-risk family. It was a bio mom who had just gotten her kid back from foster care, and she needed a mattress. This is why Care Portal is cool, because it allows you to deal and handle with situations on all sides of the spectrum. So basically, she just needed a mattress. I'm kidding. I'm not joking. When they hit send, it was within a minute or two that the churches in the Care Portal network were able to just hit respond. So basically, I'll tell you, all that needs to happen now is I go in, I activate your church, you put team members in. So if you're here and you want to be a part of this on-the-ground mobilized team, tell John, tell the team, and then they would put you, and then you would get the emails from you guys saying what the needs are, and you can help your own church, and you can help outside of your church. And it really facilitates stewardship of resources unlike anything I've ever seen.
That sounds like a plan, because otherwise these emails get kind of drowned
Yes.
in the inbox. That just never seems to get empty. You're right. So that's amazing.
And you need somebody here. You need a point person. So somebody here, not you. And I say that to protect your pastor. And I also know that God, if He's raised up this church to be a part of Care Portal, He's already raised up the leaders. So there's a point person here who needs to be the person that's getting that email and then responding to the team here and then syncing up with you about how you're going to respond. But the cool thing about it is you don't always have to respond. You could just be like, this is in our wheelhouse, this isn't. Or we can help here. And my ability to just go into churches and get to meet people and get to know pastors, it's really cool because each church has giftings and each church has things that are close to the heart of that church. So what I get to see from my vantage point on Care Portal is how God will use maybe the church that has lots of funding, but they're not as mobile in a certain way, and then He'll use the church that has the food pantry in a different way, and it's really, really amazing to be a part of that. So I can't wait to see what you guys are going to do. You guys are going to blow that up.
When you first told me about it, it really fits exactly what we want to be as a church, where it's, yeah, we want to care for one another in this room, but man, we want to show God's love to those outside of our community, and this provides a tool to do it, right? And so I'm super excited about it, and yeah, that'd be great. All right, listen, we are just about out of time.
Okay.
In fact, we're pretty much out of time. But I want to, there's a couple things, so something came in through Facebook this week, and I want to talk just for a moment. I just want to unwind you and let you go about the process, because so many in this room, I think, have been feeling a tug, right? Somebody in this room has felt a tug to adopt, but there's so many fears about it, right? So can you address what are some of the core fears, and then do you have a response to that?
Yeah. The core fears, I would say, are normally, the fears that we get, that are the first things that people come to me to talk about, are usually, I need help with paperwork, I need help, or I'm concerned that adoption is going to take a long time, or the biggest one I get, from men especially, is it's a lot of money. And, you know, my perspective about that is, you know, if it's a money thing, I've never seen an adoption not happen because of money. And I've done this a long time. It's never because of the money. It's maybe God puts up a roadblock. Maybe somebody shouldn't adopt, you know. And so, but it's never been the money. I think the money, for men especially, is a tangible thing that sort of holds in it all the other unspoken fears, all the other uncertainty, all the other feelings of doubt, self-doubt, fears that I won't love a child that wasn't mine biologically. Fears that they're, you know, it's going to be so chaotic, or that we're not going to connect with this kid. All the things that I would help you put words to, because I've done this a long time, and I feel like that's our job. I describe myself a little bit as like an adoption doula. Like, I'm just going to handhold. I'm not your agency. You know, I'm not your mom. I'm not gonna question you in a way that maybe a mom might. I don't have those biases, but I'm going to help you to sort of understand, is this truly a calling? And most of the time I can tell within the first few minutes of talking to somebody, because they usually just start crying and they say, I don't know what it is, I just know that I'm supposed to do this. There's two types of families. That's the one, I call them pioneering families, and they just have always known they would adopt. You kind of probably were that, we were that, we just always knew we would. We were in a family where it would have been acceptable for us to do that. So props to both of our parents who were like, okay, scared for you, but we're going to support you anyway, you know, as good parents do. So those fears are real. They're something you should consider. Jesus says before you build something, you should plan it. So definitely you want to plan. But then there is a little bit of a releasing this into the Lord's hands. And I would say, pray against it. Ask God to close the door. And, you know, if he just keeps tugging at your heart, and you just can't sleep at night for thinking about this, then you're probably called to this. I say we're all commanded to do something. What you do and how you do it is kind of your calling, but the biblical mandate's there for all of us, not just the crazy adoption people. But the fear about money, speaking specifically to the men, I have watched God do amazing things with money. And money is never going to be a barrier that can't be overcome. We have a fund at Miriam's. Oddly, so this fund we started before it made sense to, but we just knew God was telling us to do it. And now that fund, which we give small grants to adoptive families, and sometimes that's for counseling and post-placement stuff, and sometimes that's for, like, we sent adoptive families on a respite cruise where they got training and they got all kinds of pouring in, and we gave them grants, and we've given grants to parents and kids to just heal and connect with each other and kind of overcome the adversities that are in all of our lives. You know, parenting is hard, period. Parenting a kid who's gone through trauma and loss looks like what it might look like if your biological child was harmed and then returned to you. And so you have to learn this new dance step with each other. And so over time, as you keep doing this new dance, you learn each other and it becomes natural, just like it does if you had a biological kid and you're kind of trying to figure out how are we going to sleep? You get in these family rhythms, and in the same way, adoption has its own rhythm. It's got its own beat. It's got its own stuff. But that's why we're here, to kind of equip you. And, you know, on the way here, I was talking with my husband and I said, anytime there is a fear that is preventing you from action, that is not from the Lord. And that's just been my experience. I like when I'm a little bit scared and a little bit excited. I thrive in that place, but I know everybody doesn't thrive there. If you are feeling led to adopt or foster, but you are afraid of fill in the blank, that you need to give to the Lord, because He will guide, He will open doors, He will close doors, and He will give you peace in the midst of all of that uncertainty, that you will know that this is the direction that He has for you. So if it's a money thing, talk to me after. Our fund is mobilized over $100,000. And I say that because we are a teeny itty bitty nonprofit. We are not fiscally flush with cash. We have no paid staff, we're all volunteers. But that fund has been so fruitful in funding adoptions, because 100% of the monies that come into that fund go to families. There's not an administrative fee unless you use like the online processor where it charges you like 2% to use a credit card online. But like if you wrote a check to Lifesong Care of the Miriam's Heart Fund, because they manage our fund for us, so I don't have to look at people's tax returns. They are underwritten and with money, so they don't take off the top. So if you said, oh, we're putting $100 in the adoption fund, $100 goes to a family. So if you're here and you feel led to adopt, you can essentially do an offering for that family and have that money, say to us, the fund committee, which is like me, Jimmy, and one other gentleman, we're going to do an offering for this family that's adopting, because we're going to stand with you tangibly and show you how God can move when you just make your life an offering. We're going to do this for you, and just watch what He does. I mean, I've just watched it so many times. Yeah. I say it with so much conviction because I've watched Him move in this way. Don't let money be your barrier. There's also the tax credit. There's other things you can talk to me about later, but don't let that be a barrier.
You see why she's here? Thank you so much, Elizabeth.